presentation is on Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. This is for Dr. Russell's music appreciation class. Mozart was born on January 27th, 1756, and he died December 5th, 1791. He was only 35 at the time of his still mysterious death. A quick summary of his life is he lived as a kind of a stereotypical starving musician, which was a little bit strange for the time because most musicians were under the system of patronage. He was an extraordinary pianist and a genius composer. He composed most of his works from memory, and in spite of being very popular, he lived and died in poverty. Like I said, he was a virtuosic pianist from a very young age, age 5. He traveled and played with his father in Salzburg as a court musician until age 17, when he decided to move to Vienna to avoid patronage. He married against his own will at 26 for financial reasons, had 6 children, only 2 of which survived infancy, and he died at 35 and was buried in an unmarked grave. His resistance to patronage started when he was 17, when he begrudgingly worked as a court musician in Salzburg. He moved to Vienna at 17, where he composed most of his works as a free musician. He attempted to support his family as an independent composer, but was not particularly successful. Here we see a Freemason gathering in Vienna. This is something where you would have that small chamber music. That's kind of typical of the string quartet at the time, something Mozart wrote a lot for, in addition to a lot of solo piano work. His personal struggles, he struggled financially since he left home at age 17. He struggled to find a suitable wife and married Constanze at his father's request. In spite of it being kind of a forced marriage, their marriage was loving and happy, but they did lose 4 of their 6 children in infancy. His financial struggles include his self-imposed financial struggle of being an independent musician. Like I alluded to before, this was a little bit atypical of the time. Haydn and Beethoven did not have these similar financial struggles because they were kind of sponsored by the royal court. So he remained impoverished for most of his life in spite of being enormously popular. In addition to that, he could not support the lavish lifestyle of a lot of his royal and rich friends, who he tried desperately to keep up with socially, but was unsuccessful. He was in a lot of debt for most of his life. He has some insightful quotes that give us a little look into his life and his composing. He said he pays no attention whatsoever to anyone's praise or blame. He simply follows his own feelings. And this gives us a little look into the classical period. Music, even in situations of the greatest horror, should remain beautiful. His musical accolades were many. He composed some of the most important harpsichord and chamber music of all time. He developed a sonata allegro form. This was predictable, pleasing, and most importantly for those social gatherings, easy to dance to. It allowed social interaction with the music and musicians. Mozart built and solidified the sonata by building on the work of Haydn. He built on Haydn's sonata rondo form, and this Mozart's sonata allegro form was famous in German, English, and French and Italian courts. And he had the ability, like I said earlier, to compose entire symphonies or operas almost completely from memory. So here we see Mozart. He has a very creative signature, and you can see here Allegretto at the beginning of the score in the background. That's a little bit of an excerpt from a Sonato Allegro. So Mozart's operas. He was most probably biggest known in Vienna for his opera. He helped pioneer the opera buffa, which added some elements of comedy and irony, had a lot of morbid German humor, to opera seria, which was from the Baroque era. So Mozart helped pioneer the classical opera. We see here a painting of an opera house back in the day, in the classical era. Here's a modern rendition of one of Mozart's operas. You can see that it was packed in the classical era. This is where a lot of people went to see Mozart. So a big factor at the end of his life was his declining mental health. Don Giovanni is theorized to be partially autobiographical. The protagonist struggles with a lot of the problems Mozart struggled with, most notably his problems with his father, which is the primary antagonist in Don Giovanni. Here we see Mozart a little bit later in his career when he's well beyond the reach of his father, no longer a kid, and he did not particularly, his biographer said, enjoy playing for these rich social gatherings on his own. He was really considered himself a composer. So he was the master of the opera in Vienna during his time, his short life. Mozart employed two of the most important lyricists of the time. Don Giovanni, The Marriage of Figaro, and Così fan tutti are all opera masterpieces of the classical era that are still done today. He had a lot of peer influences. Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven were all probably the biggest composers of the classical era, if not just the German composers. But they all kind of fell into these categories. Beethoven was considered the master of the symphony. Haydn made a lot of concertos, and Mozart really pioneered the classical opera to build on opera seria. So Mozart's death is a point of huge controversy. He said he is writing a requiem for himself. It was his greatest religious work and was considered his final goodbye for many. So suicide or some sort of knowledge about his upcoming death was suspected. So it's a big conspiracy. His death was likely due to kidney failure accompanied by some common diseases at the time, but it is still a medical and musical mystery, and murder or foul play by his rival Antonio Salieri were suspected for a long time. So Mozart was survived by his wife and two children. His wife remarried his biographer, but his music was his true legacy. His family was not left rich or royal, and he is considered to be one of the most brilliant composers of all time because of his ability to compose so much largely from memory. And here we have Mozart's historical grave, but it is uncertain whether those are actually his remains, and it is not his actual grave site, because he died poor and unmarked grave.